Just last week, I made an incredible setup for a group of tiny turtles, but it's not that simple. Creating the projects I do from the confines of my home is generally straightforward because I have nearly everything I need to make it happen, like tools to surplus materials from years of previous builds and everything in between. Plus, I can do things on my own time. I always try my best to plan everything out, but the vision changes constantly as I work through the project because no two are alike. The process is complicated exponentially when I do installations on the go. Additionally, I'm one of those people who can never truly stop working. So when my wife and I planned a vacation, naturally my mind went there. I thought, Charlie lives near where we want to stay. Why not see if he'd let me do a build at his place? So that's exactly what I did, and we agreed to do a display for 3 straight mud turtles about a month ago. These are some of the smallest turtles in the world, maxing out at only 3 to 4 inches. The turtles I'm showing here are full-grown adults and the ones I made the setup for. Just because the turtles are small doesn't mean the setup had to be. We agreed on going with a 48 by 24 by 24 inch aquarium, which equates to 120 gallons. Going big would allow me to best capture the essence of their native range, which in turn will facilitate the widest and most natural range of behaviors possible. In nature, they inhabit quiet bodies of water such as the Everglades. A few noteworthy features to consider were relatively shallow water, marginal plant growth, botanicals, cypress knees, and limestone, which is found all throughout Florida. Charlie sourced what he could locally, and the rest I had sent down before my arrival. Triple checking my lists, I did my best to account for everything, but something is always missing. We also had to change the aquarium the day before I left. The original tank got back ordered, so we resorted to a reef-ready setup. I was going to drill the other, so this made the job easier in that regard, but more challenging in others. When I first got there, I had to determine how to best plumb everything. Unfortunately, we were missing a few PVC fittings. Luckily, the store was closed, so Charlie went and got those while I addressed a few things. First of which was this corner overflow. It took up precious real estate and is completely unnecessary since this will be hooked up to a canister filter. Luckily, it was really easy to remove. I also applied a frosted film to the back of the tank to conceal the racks behind it. I wasted no time after that and got to work. I installed the bulkhead fittings accordingly and primed various PVC pieces. I installed them with a quick set cement that is fully cured in 2 hours or less. I ended up using a 90-degree elbow for the filter's intake strainer and a straight fitting for a lock line return. It was at this point that I realized I was being observed from every angle. The Geomita Spangler, I wanted to know what I was doing in their space, and they ended up watching steadfast to the very end. Anyway, I had to account for a piece of egg crate light diffuser on the bottom that will evenly distribute the weight of various hardscape elements. I cut it to fit perfectly. Another somewhat last minute inclusion was a proper land area for digging and laying eggs. This 3.5 gallon bucket was perfect for what we set out to do. I just had to remove the handle and it was good to go. My goal was to build the entire scape out from here while simultaneously concealing the filter components. I used this old cypress stump that's been in an outdoor stock tub for years, more or less as the key element. It's already waterlogged and seasoned with life, so it was a great option. Even so, we cut it up into smaller pieces that fit perfectly around the bucket, which would float as is, so I drilled holes through it and slate tiles that I combined together with stainless steel wire. I covered this from the inside with seam tape in hopes to waterproof it. I placed it back between the wood and proceeded to fill the scape with pieces of Florida limestone. As I said earlier, this is found all over Florida, which is where the turtles are from. To stabilize it all, I mixed up a 2-part epoxy that I placed between contact points. I also filled most of the void space with smaller limestone pieces. Another feature we really wanted to include were cypress knees. I'll anchor them to pieces of slate, but I had to check the layout first. Once I did, I drilled holes accordingly and secured them from underneath with stainless steel screws. I continued adding stones around these elements to hide the plumbing. As I did all of this, I made pockets within the hardscape for various local grasses and other plants that grow in a riparian environment. I put this grass mostly near the land area where the water will be fairly shallow, while I use this horsetail within the water feature itself. It will better tolerate the depth of water. Then I filled these areas with aqua soil to give the plants a proper growing medium. I capped that with limestone gravel, followed by a thick layer of fine white sand, and began spraying it down to remove debris. From there I continued filling to see how the bucket would hold up. Although it didn't float, I realized I made a huge error. I should not have anchored it down the way I did. The seam tape just wasn't a viable solution in this instance. Looking back, I should have just used the holes left over from where the handle was. I could have tied it down with a wire to the slate from there without drilling the bucket at all. I was really stressed out at this point because I didn't want to dismantle the hardscape and start over. I had everything looking good and what little time I had to do this was starting to run out. To remedy the situation, I cut the top off of another bucket and nested it inside the original. I created holes along the top and zip tied the buckets together. If I would have had more time to plan and think through the anchoring process better, I could have avoided this altogether, but this fixed the issue and I could continue. I packed small cracks around the buckets with sphagnum moss to create a natural barrier for a substrate mix I filled it with. It's a blend of cocoa fiber, soil, sand, and charcoal. Atop this and throughout the water feature, I added local botanicals that have been pre-soaked. This allowed them to sink immediately. And as you all know by now, a setup like this would not be complete without floating plants. I know most people don't, but both of us really like duckweed, so we decided on that. And that more or less completed the build itself, so we let the tank settle overnight. Back the following morning and everything held up well. Things were looking pretty good with the water being mostly clear. And to my surprise, it was already teeming with life. Ramshorn snails and scuds already called the place home, and we didn't purposefully add any of these. They're a welcome addition though. No doubt they found their way in via various materials we pulled from outside bins, like that cypress stump which as you can see is already covered in algae. The goal here was to create something that would closely mimic the turtle's natural range. From the materials used to the botanical filled water feature to the marshy shallow area in the back and much more, I think we pulled it off quite well. Alongside all of that, we included an LED plant light over the whole thing and a mercury vapor bulb over part of the land to create a hotspot for basking while also providing UV light. All things considered, I think it turned out really well. It doesn't matter what I think though. How will the turtles find their new home? We added 3 total and they truly seemed to enjoy it. They swam around, explored, and simply looked perfect in this environment. Understanding the animals' behaviors, you can plan all you want, but you never know exactly how they're going to use it until they do. As I explained throughout the video, we drew inspiration heavily from their environment and more or less just created a biotope for them. So it only makes sense that they'd immediately appear at home, and I personally think that's a hallmark of a setup done right. Additionally, something cool that I wanted to highlight is that one of the turtles we put in here is a rescue. She was attacked by a crow, left in a really bad spot, and likely wouldn't have made it on her own. She's healed up now, but a lot of the tissue in her left arm is missing. Charlie nursed her back to health, and although she'll never be completely restored, this gave her a second chance at life. That's all that I was able to capture during my time there, but much more has occurred since. From what I see in these clips and what I've been told, they've settled in really nicely. Unsurprisingly, the shallow areas seem to be their favorite place to relax, which is awesome to see. I love seeing them swim and root through the botanicals as well. Just as I've described with fish, utilizing them is a great way to make a setup look more dynamic while providing natural stimulation for the animals. I can never get over how curious turtles are as well. As with most others, they need to know what's going on and what you're doing in their space. And although I observed some of this last week, it's rewarding to see how much more comfortable they appear only a few days later. I loved seeing it all in person, and even more so in the footage from afterward. This setup will continue to be used for educational purposes alongside an array of other animals Charlie works with. Although they're part of his personal collection, they can serve as a great talking point about conservation. After all, he runs the Moorcroft Conservation Foundation, which supports various other organizations that focus on conserving turtles, so obviously it's something he's passionate about. For me, I'm happy to be a part of that as well, providing a naturalistic home for these incredible animals and bringing you all along for the journey. Being able to create things like this to properly showcase the animals is something I'm really passionate about, and this wasn't the first time I've done it here either. Last year I helped build a pond in the backyard, which is looking incredible to this day. Things have grown in significantly since then, and he's done a lot of landscaping around it. He's added a lot of cool projects of his own as well, from a hydroponic goldfish garden to a carnivorous bog planter and a microgreens farm for his turtles. I personally love seeing what other people are doing in this hobby. It gives me a lot of inspiration, and in this instance, I get to be a part of it as well. I'm sure it won't be the last time either, but for now, that concludes my time in Florida and the journey of how I built a new setup for tiny turtles.